was growing up and I was watching Iron Man on TV and reading the comic books, inevitably in every Iron Man book, in every cartoon, the crisis would come. The world was about to be destroyed, and he would run out of power. And he had to find a power source in order to keep the shard from killing him. And of course, they went to commercial, or it was the next issue. But inevitably, he found something. He stopped the shard from going into his heart, and he saved the world. Well, the reason Iron Man became my favorite superhero is because, like him, I have a problem with my heart. In my case, I have a hole in my heart, literally. I was born in Edmonton in January 1960, so yeah, it was a few years ago that I was in grade 8. I was born in Edmonton, and I was born with a hole in my heart, which was actually a hole in one of the parts of my heart. But I also had a pulmonary valve that was narrowed. I had the aorta was misplaced, and one of the chambers of the heart had become overdeveloped by trying to compensate for all of the other things that were wrong. It's a condition called tetralogy of Fallot. And I've lived with that for close to 60 years now. About a year or so after I was born, my family moved from Edmonton to Toronto and then eventually to Hamilton, but we needed to be close to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto because I was going to have an open heart surgery. And even though I wasn't a billionaire, playboy, genius philanthropist, I had to learn, like Tony Stark did whenever he did not have his Iron Man suit on, live within his limitations. I had to learn to live within mine. I had to frequently recharge. I would be going to school, walking to school with my friends, and every block I would have to squat. Now, I'd demonstrate that for you right now, but I'd never get back up. But I had to squat to catch my breath. And I always had teachers and friends and family coming up and making sure that I wasn't overexerting myself or I wasn't in trouble. And it was something that I continually had to do. And even though I had surgery in 1968, and I started to live a relatively normal life. I joined Cub Scouts. I learned to ride a bike. There were some things that I still could not do. For example, I couldn't be in competitive sports. And so I turned to more intellectual pursuits. I became a library assistant. That's where part of my love for books comes from. I ended up, when I was in high school, I was on the Reach for the Top team for 3 years. So if you want to have a game of Trivial Pursuit, I'm on. And I ended up joining a local musical theater group, amateur musical theater group, and was with them for 3 or 4 productions. And even my initial career path took a sudden turn. Initially, I had planned to go into the ministry as an ordained minister, but because of my health conditions, I wasn't able to. So in the 1980s, when I moved back to Edmonton, I ended up becoming a reporter, and I ended up learning how to chase down stories, and I did a lot of fun stuff. I went flying in a hot air balloon. I was flying in a glider at one point, and even had a chance to pilot it for a few seconds. Went into RCMP ride-alongs, went to rodeos, took pictures at rodeos, learned to sail a catamaran, cross-country skied in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. But for all that I was able to do in my 20s and 30s, there were some things I could not do. For example, when the snowbirds came to town and they were asking for reporters to go into fly-alongs with them, no. That was a no-no. And in one story I was doing, I was following the training of RCMP auxiliary constables, and I never did the physical training component of what they were doing. There were limitations that I had to live with. But through all of this, and through all the stories that I had and all the stories that I did, there were a few that had a personal impact on me, none more so than one I found in Edmonton when I interviewed the University of Alberta Hospital's Dr. Ruth Nakai Collins. And she had just become involved in an organization that was developing specialties and specialists for adults with congenital heart conditions, like mine. And it was something that was really new, and it was something that hadn't been done before. And I suddenly discovered that what was happening was people who had had operations and heart surgery in the 1960s and 1950s suddenly needed specialized care. they suddenly needed to have people who understood the different mechanics that were taking place in their heart. Because to a degree, we were all walking time bombs ready to go off. And in my case, that happened. I moved from Edmonton back to Guelph, my wife's hometown. I was sitting at my desk at work. I was in my 40s, and then all of a sudden I passed out. I woke up, got one of my staff people to take me to the hospital, and discovered that the initial surgery that I had, some scar tissue had invaded the neural pathways of my heart, and so I needed a pacemaker. So that was the first time I had a pacemaker implant. I've had 3 since then. And in the meantime, that also got me hooked up with specialists in Toronto and cardiac specialists, and it led to another open heart surgery where I had a valve replaced and another valve repaired. And it's something that as you go through life, you learn to live with, you learn to adapt with. But going through a life which is a parade of doctor's appointments and tests and poking and prodding, it can start to play on you. And so one of the things that I've learned to do one of the coping mechanisms that I've done is developing a sense of humor in all of these situations and finding humor in everything. For example, when I was being wheeled into the operating room for my second open heart surgery, my wife was with me. We got to these set of double doors, and the orderly stood there and stopped and looked at her and said, "Okay, you better say goodbye to him before we put him down." Well, that was about the reaction that my wife had, and looked at him, and he goes, "Oh, no, before we put him to sleep." So, and that really didn't help much either, because it had only been a few months earlier that we'd actually had to euthanize our pet cat. So, all of this, yeah. But I've also done things where I've played with people, and I've played with the humor of the situation. We were at Riverside Park one time, and they were at an event there, and they had a family event, and they had an ambulance set up there, and they were doing ECGs, electrocardiograms. So I looked at my wife and she said, "You're not." I said, "Why not?" So I hopped up on the stretcher. They put all the wires on me. They start the machine up, and the tape comes out, and they start looking at the tape. And then the 2 ambulance attendants started looking at each other. And then they looked at me. And then they looked at my wife. And I knew they were just about to strap me into the gurney, throw me into the back of the ambulance, and say to my wife, "Meet us at the hospital. There's something wrong. We got to take him in." So I stopped and I said, "Oh, I have a heart condition," and explained it all. We all had a great laugh. I had a good laugh. And they ended up asking if they could keep my strip for reference, because they had never seen that before. But I've lived that life of continual doctor's visits. I've lived it, and I've come to understand everything that I've needed to do. And as much as I can see humor in those situations, I have to understand that there are ever-changing limitations. Just recently, I was in for a cardiological visit, and my cardiologist said to me, "Within the next couple of years, we're going to have to do another operation to replace the valve that we replaced the first time, because it's starting to wear out." Now, I had a feeling that that was coming, but I was hoping it was going to be a lot longer and a lot further away than it is. But I can take heart in this fact that I'm not alone. 1 in every 100 people are born with a congenital heart condition. If you follow anything during Heart Month in February, they have the 1 in 100 hashtag. I am 1 in 100. And 60 years ago, only 20% of people with congenital heart defects survived to adulthood. Today, that number is up to 90%. And there are people out there that have had congenital heart defects that you would never know. Shaun White, the snowboarder and skateboarder, Olympic medalist, had the same congenital heart defect as I do, and he's living a wonderfully wonderful life. But I couldn't have taken this journey without the help and support of my family. Initially, my parents, my brother and sister, and recently my wife, my kids. They've sat with me in waiting rooms and countless hours in waiting rooms. and emergency wards and hospital rooms, and they've put up with my gallows humor. And they've helped me through all of this. You know, at the end of Iron Man 3, Tony Stark finally had an operation that took the metal shard out of his heart. So he was cured, supposedly. With Marvel, you never know. But in my case, and those of us who live with congenital heart conditions and defects know that you're treated but never cured. And we'll continue to live with our scars. And I'm not going to show them to you right now. But as you know, living within my limitations, learning to see that humor, I've learned to become more than my scars, my operations, and the pacemakers. Who knows? Maybe I actually am Iron Man. Thank you.